Good morning, Garland Nixon here with Joti, Brar, and I'm sure if you haven't been living under a rock, even if you have been living under a rock, you're familiar with what's happening between North Korea and Russia. And Joti is going to really get into the importance of how this affects the anti-imperialism dynamic in the world. Let's talk. President Putin's going to North Korea. I thought, well, that's interesting. The legacy of anti-imperialism, particularly regarding these two countries. Your thoughts on what this means for the world and for those of us who are opposing imperialism?
Sure. You know, for me, the real focus of this is North Korea, because of how completely vilified it's been by the West in recent times, since the fall of the Soviet Union in particular, and how much it's had to withstand economically, politically, in every sphere, because of its refusal to give up its socialist system, its refusal to give up its sovereignty and independence. You know, this visit of President Putin's and the pacts they have signed for economic, military cooperation and assistance, and this treaty that's a mutual defense treaty, no less, this is very, very serious and significant. It also does something to the anti-imperialist camp, which is very, very significant, which we've talked a bit about this before, but this really kind of systematizes what was informally clearly happening, which is that the anti-imperialist camp is coming back together in a way we haven't seen since the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953. Now, at that time, the anti-imperialist camp was led, very clearly led, by socialist communist countries, and those communist countries all worked together under the leadership of Joseph Stalin in the USSR, of Mao Zedong in China, of Kim Il-sung in North Korea. These were the great leaders of the world, and all of the national liberation struggles in the world, whether Marxist or not, looked to them for guidance, for help, for arms, for support of all kinds, and as a kind of base to go to get trained, to get educated. You know, they had a shared homeland in the Soviet Union, all of those countries. What's really significant is Russia, in building this modern relationship with the DPRK, is heavily leaning into the traditions of the Stalin era. President Putin wrote an article for the Korean press in which he specifically talked about all of the feats that were performed together by the National Liberation Forces of Korea under the leadership of Kim Il-sung and by the Red Army under the leadership of Joseph Stalin. He talked about how the Red Army fought side by side with the Korean People's Liberation Army to kick out the Japanese, to liberate the country, how Soviet aid helped to establish the socialist DPRK and start to build up its industry, etc. How during the Korean War, which was imposed on the Korean people by the US imperialists and various of their satellites for 3 years, which killed between 4 and 5 million Koreans, the Korean people were able to fight back with the aid of the rest of the socialist camp. China at that time had only just finished a massively long and arduous revolutionary process. The Chinese Revolution was kind of was announced as successful, let's put it that way. It wasn't like over, but you know, one stage of the revolution and the victory of the people was announced on the 1st of October 1949. In 1950, the Chinese got together 1 million volunteers to go to the aid of the Koreans when they were being invaded by the US occupiers. That's a huge sacrifice that the Chinese people made to try to defend Korea. At the same time, the Soviet Union, although it was in a difficult position because of not wanting to trigger a world war with nuclear weapons, not wanting to be targeted directly and face, you know, again, it was only recently come out of all the devastation of World War II. You have to remember that in 1950, ideologically, the anti-imperialist camp was very strong, but militarily and in terms of its people, many of them were exhausted, after everything that they'd been through in World War II and in their various liberation struggles. The Soviet Union, as you know, lost 27 million people in World War II. They were still busy reconstructing their country, which had been utterly decimated by the Nazis. The Soviet Union sacrificed a great deal also in helping North Korea during that time and showed great strength. They also did something, a little logistical thing they did. A lot of people don't realize that they instituted a roadblock leading into the western part this was a Soviet instigation. They basically set up a roadblock outside in the road that leads into West Berlin. So, Berlin's in the middle of East Germany. East Germany at that time was a new socialist state. West Berlin was in the hands of the West, and they had to get into it to bring supplies because it was their sort of little haven in the middle of East Germany. They basically blocked the road so that the imperialists had to put loads of resources into airlifting supplies throughout the course of the Korean War, which obviously diverted some of their capabilities away from Korea. So it was a deliberate act of solidarity to the struggling people of Korea that they instituted. They just put in this roadblock, So the Soviets were very firm supporters of North Korea. So were the Chinese.